You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast. Hey, glad to have you on board. Hope you're doing well, and if you're wondering what the podcast is all about, well, this podcast deals with everything technical related to vertebrate pest management. So we delve deep into some of the scientific literature to try to give you an edge over your competition, or perhaps to improve your technique so that you can get jobs done more quickly, safely, responsibly. So, hey, glad to have you here. I am recording on Christmas Eve, so got to get things done, trying to get more podcasts in the kitty for January, and so my kitty has gotten a little lower, and so I need to get some push that time out a little bit farther. So if you have questions, comments, thoughts, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Excuse me, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Well, last couple of weeks ago, I did a podcast on snake repellents, and I am continuing that theme this week, doing another particular repellent. So before we get quite to that, you can certainly look at my website, where we have a store where we have a whole host of items available for sale that are training materials. You can also reach out to me through here if you're looking for more specific training. Perhaps you want me to do a training event or help you with a PowerPoint, perhaps, that you need to update and get ready for a presentation, so that I clean it up and make it look prettier, and also use best practices when it comes to a PowerPoint. You can definitely reach out to me again. How do you reach me? Well, it's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. All right, well, let me pull my PowerPoint up here and get that started. All right, let's take a look here. So this week, wanted to deal with the issue of naphthalene, and so some of you may be familiar with that. It's one of the products that's used for mothballs, not as much as it has been in the past, but it is mothballs, depending which version you get, can be made from two different products. One is naphthalene, and the other is paradiachlorobenzene. So typically most of the mothballs I see today are paradichlorobenzene rather than the naphthalene, but I think if you look hard enough, you can still find some that were made from the naphthalene. So it just depends on, they kind of both smell the same, but they have a little bit of different effect on some of the insects, for example, because it's not really designed for things other than insects per se, although there was a label, and I think the label is still around, for a snake repellent. So now if you look at the active ingredients, which you should, you want to look at naphthalene. So the question is, does naphthalene work as a snake repellent, right? So this is an article published by someone I used to work with. His name is Dennis Ferraro, and he's still at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He's now an assistant professor there, I believe. And so he is all things, this guy is the herpetologist of herpetologists. He is all in on herpetology. So this was a study that he published back in 1995. And so he was using a product that was made out of naphthalene. And we're going to be discussing the work that he published in the Great Plains Damage Control Workshop Proceedings, 12th edition, 12th volume, pages 116 through 120. So let me get the title of that article for you. It's The Efficacy of Naphthalene and Sulfur Repellents to Cause Avoidance Behavior in the Plains Garter Snake. So it's very specific. So let me repeat that again for you. It's the efficacy of naphthalene and sulfur repellents to cause avoidance behavior in the Plains Garter Snake, and published by Dennis Ferraro, written by Dennis Ferraro. He's a professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and it was published in 1995 in the Great Plains Wildlife Damage Control Workshop Proceedings, Volume 12, pages 116 through 120. So this is what he did, okay? So he basically found 24 locations in urban areas located in Douglas and Sarpy counties, Nebraska. So if you're not familiar with that, that's going to be the area around Omaha. And so to select these properties, because this was a field test, right, not a lab test. Last time when we talked about repellents, we were talking about a laboratory test, right? So this is a test that's being done in the field. And he wanted a location where there were no chemicals, repellents, or insecticides on the property used within the last year. And that any snake habitat that was on the property couldn't have been disrupted for the past 6 months. The owners had to keep people and pets away from the study area. And so we had 2 different experiments. So experiment 1, the sites had to have at least 5 snakes witnessed within the past 3 months. In experiment 2 sites, they had to see no snakes within the last 3 months. Now, they timed the study to occur after mating, which in that area he says was mid-April to mid-May, and, of course, before the fall migration. So he's got a little bit of time here in the summer, and it is hot in Nebraska in the summer, I can assure you. And he says all the trials were planned for sunny or partly sunny days. So he wanted to be sure it was warm enough for the snakes to be active. And they only used what they perceived to be healthy snakes. So if a snake looked like it was not well, that snake was excluded from the study. And again, they're only dealing with the plains garter snake. Okay, so a lot of people are familiar with garters. They're really a neat snake. They're not venomous. They're completely harmless. But again, people have phobias about snakes, right? So this was what they did the study on. And so here's what they used in terms of testing the substances. Okay, so the first product they tested was naphthalene crystals that were 99% pure. So they're using effectively the pure active ingredient, right? They had sulfur. They were testing that. And of course, then they were testing a product that contained these active ingredients. And the percentages on this commercial product was 7.05% naphthalene, 28% sulfur, 65.05% inert ingredients. And so those were the 3 products they were testing. And then they also tested what they called controls. And so they tested limestone, which was made of limestone, of course. They were picking some that was where the particles were 2.5 to 10.0 millimeters in size. And their issue here was they wanted to see, I believe, if I'm understanding the paper correctly, they wanted to see if there was an aversion effect by the material. So they wanted to pick a substance that may irritate the snake to see if the reason why the product naphthalene worked was maybe because it scratched them or something and they didn't like the feeling. And then they also did a test with a strip of soil devoid of vegetation and other substrates. So they basically had some bare soil to see if the snakes would not want to cross that. You may say, well, that's kind of silly, Stephen. Well, the reason is, a lot of animals they don't want to cross bare areas because it's a psychological barrier. It makes them subject to predation. So it's a psychological barrier. All right, so this is what he did. This is how he set up. This is experiment number 1. Now remember, they had to find an area where they had to witness at least 5 snakes in the last 3 months in this area. So what they did was they had a snake, and then they basically had a 6-inch test strip, and they moved the snake so it was away from the test strip and where it would possibly move toward habitat. So they wanted this, they know that the snake is going to want to go toward cover. And now, so would the snake avoid the repellent or the products that they put in the test strip. And 6 inches, that's pretty wide, so it should be sufficient. And this is what they tested. So if they put the snake down and it did not move for 15 minutes, they basically took it away, right? They ended the test. So it had the snake had to either not move or found cover or moved 10 meters. If it didn't do any of those things, then the test was over for that particular snake. Okay, so it's a pretty straightforward test to see if it would work, right? Now, they tested 60 snakes, 32 males, 28 females. Out of the 60 snakes, 2 of them didn't move and were designated as avoidance behavior to the commercial repellent. So even with their type of standard, they gave the commercial repellent the benefit of the doubt and declared it as avoidance behavior. Only 4 of the snakes tested moved in a way that would exhibit, in their opinion, complete avoidance. 47 snakes did not exhibit avoidance behavior at all. That was 78.3% of the snakes tested. None of those exhibited any avoidance behavior of that test strip. Not too good. So let's take a look at the chart here that he has. Okay, so we had the number of snakes. So we have the treatment, what was the product in the test strip, the number of snakes that were tested with that product, the number of locations that were used, and then their behavioral patterns when they let them go, right? So basically, when they had 10 snakes tested with naphthalene, 8 showed non-avoidance behavior, 2 showed avoidance behavior. 10 with sulfur, 9 showed no avoidance behavior, only 1 showed avoidance behavior. The mixture, 20, the mixture would have been the commercial product, I believe. 20 snakes were tested, 4 different locations. 3/4 of them showed no avoidance behavior. And on the blank control, 8 showed non-avoidance, 2 showed avoidance. Out of a total, so they have a total trials of 60. So not very good results on terms of this first experiment number 1. None of the products really worked at all, because you say, well, there was some efficacy. Yeah, but you have to understand, you have to account for probability, right? There's always going to be a portion of the population that just does something weird, right? So, for example, if I went to the middle of a street and screamed at the top of my lungs, how many people would attack me? Well, the chances are very few, but there's going to be a few that would probably attack me. Okay, so could I say that because a few attacked me that my screaming had a repellent effect, right? So you have to look at things in terms of what the probability is of it happening. Did it have any real effect, as opposed to just the differences among people's behavior, animals' behavior in this case. All right, let's take a look at experiment number 2. They were testing unfamiliar habitat, right? So the snakes were new to the area, because there were no snakes witnessed in this area for the past 3 months. So they had what they called potential habitat, but again, these snakes were naive to the area. Same principles as before. The test was over if the snake didn't move for 15 minutes or found cover or moved greater than 10 meters. Those were probably about 11 feet or so. Okay. Excuse me, not 10 meters, 30 feet, 32, 33 feet or so. They filled the trench, or that test strip with the chemical, 1/2 to 1 inch in depth, right? And the capture site where they found these snakes was over 2 miles away from this location. So they were completely new to this particular area. What were the results? Again, 36 snakes were used, so it's a smaller trial than the first one, but more sites, 12 different trial sites were used. One snake did not move within 50 seconds, so that's certainly a problem. 77.8% of the snakes demonstrated non-avoidance behavior by crossing the test strip. That doesn't sound like much of repellent. Of the 8 snakes that showed avoidance behavior, 6 moved away from the test strip. What did the other 2 do? Well, let's find out. So here's experiment 2. So we have 6 snakes that were used for naphthalene in 2 different locations. 5 non-avoidance behaviors in 1 avoidance. Sulfur, 4 non-avoidance behaviors, 2 avoidance. Mixture, that's the commercial product, 10 non-avoidance behaviors, 2 avoidance behaviors. That's pretty bad. Limestone control, 5 non-avoidance behavior, 1 avoidance behavior. The blank control was where they just stripped the grass, 4 non-avoidance, 2 avoidance. So again, a total of 36 snakes were tested across 12 different locations. What's the bottom line here? Well, the author concluded that he did not recommend the use of any of these products to repel snakes. And he also argued, and I found this rather interesting in terms of what he said. This is, again, Dennis Ferraro. He argued that due to the imprinting of young snakes, the odors may actually encourage snakes to approach areas where they occurred. What he's referring to here is when a young snake smells certain products, they can become attracted to it when they smell it again. So this is something where he was suggesting, now he didn't offer proof of this, right? But what he's saying is that possibly the use of these naphthalene-based products for repellents of, at least for the plains garter snake, may actually be an attractant over time because of they become familiar with it. So, and again, as in the first podcast I did on snake repellents, same principles kind of apply, except this one was done in the field. Notice that we have the product being used outdoors, and so now the question, of course, is would the product work better if they were indoors, right? And so, but then you have the question of, naphthalene can be quite irritating to people, and there are some health concerns with exposure to naphthalene because when you use the product, if you follow the label, it's supposed to be used for insects primarily, and you're often supposed to use it in an enclosed container, right? So if you're putting it inside of a house, for example, to keep a snake from moving from maybe one side of the basement to the other, I'm just throwing out a potential use of it. Maybe someone saw a snake in the basement and they desperately don't want it to go over to one side because maybe they're moving, who knows? Or they don't want it to come up the stairs. They put some, the product at the bottom of the stairs, and they're like, well, would that work in that situation? Well, again, you'd have to have another study to find out. But at least as far as something that's outdoors, there's some real problems because you have snakes just crawling right over it. And I believe he even had photos, not in this particular publication, but he had photos where he had snakes just crossing over it that he photographed without any type of, they weren't bothered by it whatsoever. So use with caution. I have talked in the past about the issue of, is there a value in a placebo effect? Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that there's no evidence that these naphthalene products work. Let's just say they don't work for the sake of argument. But you're dealing with a client whose spouse is deathly afraid of snakes and wants to move out of the house. Is there a value in using a repellent, I'll put that in quotes, to help this person get over the psychological barrier, the phobia that they have about snakes? Now, I don't believe in lying to clients. So, but in this case, you're not lying. You wouldn't be lying to your client. You would tell the client, well, sir, ma'am, I don't believe the product works. It is available. At least it was available when I was in business. I don't believe it works, but you can use this and follow the label and just tell your wife that it works, or tell your husband that it works. And now it's not you lying, it's your client lying to their partner. So that becomes a different thing. And I have questions about that. But given the phobias that people have, I mean, I've heard of people saying, I'm going to, get a hotel for the night, things of this nature. And that can be quite costly for someone. If they can have a $30 bucket of repellent that can be put down, even if people think that it works, that may be enough to calm them down. So I'll leave that to you. We're dealing with sort of an ethical dilemma, but I certainly don't recommend that you ever lie to a client. If you are going to sell them a product that is supposed to be a repellent, and let's say they had garter snakes. I mean, it looks like the plains garter snake. There's no evidence that naphthalene, sulfur, whatever the commercial product that he was using, none of that seemed to work. Even limestone didn't seem to work. Lime didn't seem to work. Bare grass didn't work, right? In terms of stopping movement over that barrier, which is the purpose of a lot of repellents, right? To be an area barrier. If they know all that going in, they might be able to, use it as a rabbit's foot. Hey, this is going to keep you safe, even if it's not. But certainly you as a business owner, I do not recommend that you ever say, oh yeah, all this stuff's going to work. You want to be very careful, because even products, even repellents, and we've talked about deer repellents, for example, even when we have evidence that these deer repellents actually have efficacy, they're never 100%. And I'm not aware of any repellent that is 100%, although there may be one, but it's a very unique situation when it's used. It's really a flushing device more than a repellent. Okay, but I'm quibbling with some very technicalities there. But so even be careful with products that even work, because we said that no deer repellent works 100% of the time. So when we have evidence that they do work, the research is pretty clear about that. So beware. Be careful if you're going to be purchasing these products, at least for the plains garter snake. So make sure you're want to read that article. You can download it. It is available online. Let me kind of get back to giving you his name again, if you want to look it up yourself. Again, his name is Dennis Ferraro. That's Ferraro. And he published an article called The Efficacy of Naphthalene and Sulfur Repellents to Cause Avoidance Behavior in the Plains Garter Snake. So, and that's available online if you want to search for it. Otherwise, thanks for listening to the podcast. And we're getting really into the weeds here on snake repellents, but a lot of this stuff is important. Snake phobias are real. A lot of people struggle with them. And we want to make sure that we are knowing what the products are, and to the extent they work or don't work, depending on your perspective on some of this, so that you can use these products appropriately, wisely, and of course within the law. Well, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You've been listening to the Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast, where we deal with all things technical in the vertebrate pest space. So if you have questions, comments, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. Even if you have criticisms, we'll take those as well. And also, if you know of anyone who would like to be on the show, perhaps they have a product or service they would like to discuss that would be suitable for people in the wildlife control space, we'd love to hear from them. Do take a few moments, if you would, to listen to the podcast about being on the show, just so that you know what you're kind of getting into. So we'd be happy to have you on. We love having guests on the show. All right, well, that's it for me this week. Happy New Year, everyone. Take care. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast. Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and/or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.